Welcome to Brightside America, where ordinary people stand tall against extraordinary injustice. Subscribe now for truth and justice.
The board president's voice sliced through the morning air. $10,000, she sneered, waving the fine like a victory flag. The old veteran gripped his wheelchair armrest, metal creaking beneath his weight. Neighbors looked away, ashamed. They thought he was powerless. Minutes later, they'd realize he owned half their neighborhood. The community center was silent except for the shuffle of papers. On stage, the HOA president read the violation notice with theatrical precision, as if it were a sentence from a judge. "Your wheelchair ramp," she declared, "is unauthorized. The fine is $10,000. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Some neighbors shifted in their folding chairs. Others stared at the floor. No one spoke up. The veteran sat quietly, his weathered hands folded over his lap. His wheelchair creaked softly as he shifted his weight. The president smirked. "This isn't a nursing home. Maybe you should have thought twice before buying here, old man." Her words struck like daggers. The veteran only nodded once, his face unreadable. He wheeled himself away from the podium, the metallic hum of rubber tires on tile following him out. What no one knew was that he wasn't retreating. He was waiting. His name was Ezra Thorne, a 72-year-old Navy veteran who had spent 3 decades in military intelligence. His spine was shattered by shrapnel during the Gulf War, leaving him confined to a wheelchair. To his neighbors, he looked like a quiet, retired man scraping by on a pension. 3 years earlier, his wife Martha had passed away after a long battle with cancer. In her final moments, she clutched his hand and whispered, "Promise me you'll help people who can't help themselves." Those words became his compass. Ezra moved to Pinehurst Heights to live out his remaining years in peace, driving a battered 2008 Honda Civic and clipping grocery coupons like any struggling retiree. People assumed he was broke, invisible, unimportant. But Ezra had learned something in his years of service. The quietest person in the room often sees the most. And what Ezra saw in this neighborhood troubled him deeply. Ezra wasn't broke at all. After Martha's death, he inherited a modest fortune from a childless uncle, just over $2 million. Instead of wasting it, he invested carefully, quietly, methodically. Through a company called Thornfield Properties LLC, he began buying houses, foreclosures, estate sales, neglected homes nobody wanted. At first it was a few properties, then dozens, then hundreds. Over 15 years, Ezra quietly became the owner of 423 homes, nearly half the neighborhood. On paper, they belonged to a faceless company. In reality, they belonged to the man neighbors thought was living paycheck to paycheck. But Ezra wasn't in it for profit. His rents were affordable. Families struggling with bills stayed in their homes because of him. He blocked out greedy corporations from swallowing the neighborhood whole. And while the HOA tightened rules and preyed on the vulnerable, Ezra documented everything. Every unfair fine, every illegal vote, every selective enforcement. When the president mocked his ramp, Ezra knew the trap was ready. Her name was Vivian Blackwood. To outsiders, she was a successful real estate agent married to a city councilman. To the neighborhood, she was a tyrant in designer athleisure. Vivian had ruled the HOA for years with intimidation and selective enforcement. A cracked driveway? Fine. A mailbox an inch too tall? Another fine. But when her own fence violated setback requirements, she ignored it. She targeted the elderly, the disabled, and immigrants least likely to fight back. Residents whispered complaints, but no one dared challenge her. When Ezra's ramp appeared, doctor ordered, city permitted, Vivian pounced. She saw weakness, a helpless old man she could crush publicly, sending a message to anyone else thinking of resisting. The $10,000 fine wasn't about a ramp. It was about power. Vivian smirked as she clicked her heels out of the meeting. She thought she'd humiliated him. What she didn't know was that she'd just triggered a war she couldn't possibly win. That night, Ezra rolled up to his kitchen table. Spread across it were neatly organized files, property deeds, and HOA documents he'd collected for years. He picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number. "Marcus," he said quietly. Activate Phase 1. Marcus Wellington wasn't just a lawyer. He was Ezra's old military contact turned property attorney, and he'd been waiting for this call. For months, Ezra had documented every illegal bylaw change, every instance of selective enforcement, every corrupt contract Vivian had pushed through. His files were thicker than any HOA handbook. Ezra didn't rant. He didn't complain. He gathered evidence with the patience of a man who'd spent his life in intelligence. His silence unnerved Vivian, but it was deliberate. Every humiliation, every fine, every insult, he cataloged them, waiting for her to go too far. And with that $10,000 fine she had, Vivian doubled down. Within a week, Ezra's mailbox overflowed with violation notices. Trash can visible after pickup, $500. Bird feeders, $350. Mailbox 2 inches too tall, $250. Her nephew Brad was suddenly appointed HOA inspector. Every morning, he prowled Ezra's property with a camera, snapping photos like a paparazzi. Then came the accidents. The landscaping crew sprayed weed killer that destroyed Martha's rose bushes. A contractor accidentally severed his cable line during a live doctor's call. Sprinklers malfunctioned, flooding his driveway. Neighbors noticed. Some whispered sympathy, others looked away in fear. But Ezra stayed calm, his eyes sharp, his camera ready. Every violation he received, he matched with one of his own, Vivian's illegal fence, the treasurer's unpermitted deck, the secretary's home business. He knew exactly what he was building. A case so strong it would bring the entire HOA down. And when Vivian expanded her harassment to others, Ezra realized the community itself was ready to fight. The next HOA meeting was supposed to be Vivian's victory lap. She packed the front rows with loyalists, ready to ratify foreclosure proceedings against Ezra. Cameras from the local news were rolling. She clicked through her slideshow, flashing pictures of Ezra's ramp, his trash bin, his mailbox. Community standards must be enforced, she declared. That's when Ezra rolled forward. His wheelchair hummed against the tile, commanding silence. He positioned himself at the podium, his presence larger than life. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said evenly. "3 years ago, my wife asked me to help people who couldn't help themselves. I kept that promise by quietly purchasing 423 homes in this neighborhood." Gasps rippled through the room. That's 49.9% of Pinehurst Heights. Vivian's face went pale. Neighbors whispered frantically. The cameras zoomed in. The man she'd mocked as powerless had just revealed himself as the secret landlord of nearly half the community. And suddenly, everyone realized the rent checks they'd been writing were to him. The room erupted in chaos. Vivian tried to regain control, but it was too late. Ezra calmly handed a thick binder of evidence to the attending journalist, and another to a plainclothes federal agent who had been sitting quietly in the back. The charges were devastating: racketeering, fraud, selective enforcement, conspiracy. Within minutes, federal agents moved in. Vivian was handcuffed, her designer jacket bunched awkwardly as cameras flashed. Her husband Derek, the councilman, was escorted out in shame. Neighbors erupted in cheers. Some cried, some clapped, others simply stood in stunned silence. Ezra sat quietly at the podium, watching the tyrant who had mocked him taken away in chains. The veteran hadn't just defended himself. He'd defended the entire neighborhood. The following weeks transformed Pinehurst Heights. Fines were canceled. Illegal fees were refunded. For the first time in years, residents felt free. At the next community gathering, Ezra wheeled to the center and looked around the room. "My wife asked me to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. I think she'd be proud today." Neighbors stood and applauded. Some hugged him, others saluted. The quiet man they'd overlooked had become their champion. Ezra smiled faintly. "The quietest person in the room sees the most. Now it's your turn. What would you do if an HOA tried to bankrupt your family? Have you ever faced unfair treatment from people in power? Drop your story in the comments, we read everyone. And if this tale gave you chills or satisfaction, hit subscribe. More HOA nightmares and victories are coming every week.